Some rules aren't meant to protect you, they're meant to protect everything else from what you might become. The briefing room felt colder than usual that morning when Director Harrison slid the manila envelope across the metal table, his fingers trembling slightly as he avoided eye contact with our three-person crew. Inside, beneath the standard mission parameters for what NASA publicly called a routine satellite deployment to the outer solar system, lay a single sheet of paper marked with a classification level I'd never seen before. Cosmic clearance only. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, and the typewriter font suggested it had been created decades before modern computer systems existed. 23 rules were listed in precise, emotionless language, each more bizarre than the last. Rule 1. Never look directly at Earth for more than 30 seconds once you pass the asteroid belt. Rule 7. If crew members begin speaking in perfect unison, do not interrupt them until they finish. Rule 12. Should you encounter any structure that resembles a previous space station, under no circumstances attempt to dock or communicate. Rule 19. If your instruments detect a 13th planet in our solar system, immediately adjust course to avoid it, regardless of mission objectives. The most disturbing aspect wasn't the content of these rules, but the handwritten note at the bottom in Harrison's shaky script. Previous crews who violated these protocols were never the same upon return, if they returned at all. As I looked up from the paper, Harrison's face had gone pale. He whispered something that made my blood freeze. These rules weren't written by NASA, and we don't know who did write them, but every deep space mission that ignored them has. Resulted in ... complications we're still trying to understand. The weight of his words settled over us like a shroud. I noticed that neither of my crewmates, Thompson and Rodriguez, had touched their coffee since the briefing began. This isn't just another story about things that go wrong in space. It is about the things that were already wrong out there, waiting for us to find them, and the rules someone created to keep those things contained. Before we dive deeper into what happened during our mission, I want you to really think about this. When you're reading this tonight, maybe pause and check if your doors are locked, because some stories have a way of following you home. The first person to answer correctly will receive a small reward from me, the storyteller.
Oh.
Tonight as a way of saying thank you for watching and supporting. Here's your question. In our list of rules, which number specifically mentioned avoiding looking at something for more than 30 seconds? Let me know in the comments below, and while you're there, tell me what time it is where you are right now and what city you're watching from. I'm curious to know who's brave enough to hear this story when the sun goes down. But for now, remember this. Some knowledge comes with a price, and some rules exist because someone else already paid it. 3 days after that briefing, as our shuttle Columbia 7 prepared for launch from a facility that wasn't quite Kennedy Space Center but looked identical from the outside, I realized that the rules weren't just guidelines for our mission. They were a survival manual for something that NASA had encountered before, something they desperately hoped we would never have to face, but knew we probably would. The modifications to our equipment became apparent during the final pre-flight inspections. Subtle alterations that hadn't been mentioned in any of the technical briefings we'd attended over the past 6 months. Thompson noticed it first when he examined his helmet, an additional layer of what appeared to be line material welded to the interior crown, positioned precisely where it would block his upward field of vision when looking through the helmet's visor. Rodriguez discovered that her suit's communication array had been fitted with an unusual frequency dampener, a device that would automatically cut off any incoming transmissions lasting longer than 43 seconds, though. No one could explain why that specific duration had been chosen. My own suit contained the most disturbing modification, a small, unmarked device attached to the chest panel that our technicians claimed was a standard atmospheric processor. But when I pressed them for details about its function, they exchanged nervous glances and mumbled something about maintaining psychological stability during extended deep space exposure. The shuttle itself had undergone even more dramatic changes, with entire sections of the cargo bay sealed off behind blast doors that required special access codes none of us had been given. When I questioned Director Harrison about these modifications, he pulled me aside and explained in a voice barely above a whisper that previous missions had encountered environmental factors that required specialized equipment to handle safely. The fuel mixture had been altered as well, containing compounds that weren't listed in any aerospace manual I'd studied, and the navigation computer had been programmed with coordinates that didn't match our official flight plan. Most unsettling of all was the discovery of 3 additional life support pods hidden beneath the main cabin floor pods that were designed for occupancy, but showed signs of previous use, including scratches on the interior walls that looked disturbingly like claw marks. The launch pad itself had been relocated to a remote section of the facility, far from the observation areas where families and media typically gathered, and the entire area was surrounded by personnel wearing hazmat suits despite the fact that our mission involved no hazardous materials according to our briefing documents. As we completed our final systems check, Rodriguez pointed out that our mission patch had been replaced overnight with the design none of us had seen before, a simple black circle on a white background with no text or identifying marks of any kind. The patch's fabric felt strangely warm to the touch and seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating an optical illusion that made it appear to be a hole in our suits rather than an emblem. Thompson discovered that our emergency protocol manual had been replaced with a document containing only the 23 rules from the briefing. Now laminated and bound with metal rings that felt unnaturally cold even inside the heated shuttle, the countdown proceeded normally until the final 10 seconds, when Mission Control's voice changed mid-sentence from the familiar tones of Commander Phillips to someone else entirely, woman with a slight accent, who calmly announced that our mission had been transferred to external oversight, and that all further communications would be routed through an unnamed facility. As the engines ignited and Columbia 7 lifted off from the pad, I caught a glimpse through the small porthole of the ground crew removing their hazmat suits, revealing faces that watched our departure with expressions of profound relief, as if they were grateful to see us leave rather than proud to send us on our mission. The first violation happened 17 hours into our flight, a moment of human curiosity that would haunt the remainder of our mission with consequences none of us could have anticipated. We had just passed the orbit of Mars, our instruments showing normal readings across all systems, when Thompson made what seemed like an innocent mistake. He adjusted his helmet's position to get a better look at the navigation display and inadvertently triggered the upward-facing camera system, providing him with a direct view of the space above our shuttle for exactly 47 seconds before. Rodriguez noticed and helped him readjust his equipment. According to Rule 4, no crew member should maintain visual contact with the space directly above the shuttle for longer than 30 seconds while traveling beyond Mars orbit. But Thompson had been focused on the navigation readings and hadn't realized what he was looking at until it was too late. The response was immediate and unmistakable. Our hull sensors detected something large moving parallel to our trajectory, maintaining a distance of approximately 2 kilometers but matching our speed with impossible precision. The object didn't appear on any of our standard detection equipment. No radar signature, no thermal readings, no electromagnetic emission jet. The gravitational sensors registered a mass roughly equivalent to a small moon somehow keeping pace with our shuttle without any visible means of propulsion. Rodriguez attempted to photograph the anomaly through the side porthole, but every image came back as a blank void, as if the camera sensors simply refused to register whatever was out there accompanying us through the darkness. Thompson's behavior began to change within the first hour after his violation, starting with small things like speaking in monotone responses and staring at fixed points on the cabin wall for extended periods without blinking. When Rodriguez asked him direct questions about his condition, he would answer accurately but with a slight delay, as if he were translating her words from another language before responding. The most disturbing development occurred during our scheduled sleep cycle, when Thompson began moving through the shuttle with his eyes closed, navigating perfectly around obstacles and operating control panels with an efficiency that surpassed his normal waking abilities, all while maintaining steady, rhythmic breathing patterns that suggested he was genuinely unconscious. Our attempts to wake him during these episodes proved futile. He would respond to direct physical contact by turning to face us with his eyes still closed and delivering perfectly coherent status reports about systems he shouldn't have been able to monitor while sleeping. The external presence continued to maintain its position relative to our shuttle, neither approaching nor retreating. but our instruments detected subtle changes in its behavior whenever Thompson entered his sleepwalking state, as if it were somehow synchronizing its movements with his unconscious activities. Rule 8 specifically warned against attempting to communicate with any external entities encountered during the mission. But as Thompson's condition worsened and the presence outside grew stronger, Rodriguez and I found ourselves wondering if breaking that rule might be the only way to understand what was happening to our crewmate. By the end of our second day in space, Thompson had stopped responding to his own name entirely, answering instead only when we addressed him as Navigator, a title that appeared nowhere in our mission documentation but seemed to trigger immediate and articulate responses about our course destination and the growing list of passengers that he claimed were now traveling with us. Through the void between worlds, the silence began at coordinates that existed nowhere in our navigation charts. A region of space that our instruments insisted was empty vacuum, but our bodies recognized as something far more substantial and threatening. Rodriguez first noticed the communication failure when her regular check-in with Mission Control produced nothing but static, followed by a strange harmonic tone that seemed to resonate through the shuttle's hull rather than through the audio system. Our backup communication array showed identical results, and even the emergency beacon designed to penetrate any form of interference generated only that same haunting tone, a sound that made our teeth ache and caused small objects in the cabin to vibrate in perfect rhythm. The coordinates displayed on our navigation screen placed us in a sector designated as Zone 07. On Thompson's newly acquired star charts documents that had somehow replaced our standard navigation materials overnight without any of us noticing the exchange. These charts were hand-drawn on paper that looked centuries old, marked with symbols that resembled no human writing system, but seemed familiar in a way that triggered uncomfortable memories none of us could fully recall. Thompson, still operating under his new identity as Navigator, explained in his emotionless monotone that Zone 07 was a transition area where communication protocols changed jurisdiction, and that all messages sent from this region would be redirected to appropriate recipients through established channels. When Rodriguez demanded to know what that meant, Thompson turned to face her with eyes that reflected light like mirrors and stated that our families on Earth would receive automated messages confirming our mission's successful completion, while our actual communications would be processed by entities with greater understanding of our current situation. The shuttle's chronometer began displaying inconsistent readings, sometimes showing that we had been in Zone 07 for several hours, other times indicating that only minutes had passed since our arrival, and occasionally presenting dates that placed us years in the future or decades in the past. Our attempts to exit the zone by altering course proved futile. Every direction we traveled seemed to lead us deeper into the silent region, and our fuel consumption readings suggested we were somehow moving backwards along our original trajectory despite the engines showing forward thrust. The external presence that had been shadowing us since Thompson's violation grew stronger in the silence, no longer maintaining its careful distance, but beginning to exert subtle influence over our shuttle's systems, causing lights to dim and brighten in patterns that resembled Morse code, but delivered no meaningful message when translated. Rodriguez discovered that her personal journal had been filled with entries written in her own handwriting, describing events that had not yet occurred, but felt like memories when she read them, accounts of meetings with beings who claimed to represent the original mission planners and detailed descriptions of a facility that looked exactly like NASA, but existed in a location that wasn't quite Earth. The most disturbing aspect of Zone 07 was the gradual realization that the silence wasn't empty, it was occupied by something that actively absorbed sound, light, and electromagnetic radiation, using these absorbed energies to fuel processes we couldn't begin to comprehend. Thompson informed us with his characteristic lack of emotion that we were now part of the collection effort and that our shuttle would serve as a mobile processing unit until we reached our actual destination, a place he described as a facility where all deep space missions eventually conclude their operations. As we drifted through the consuming silence, Rodriguez and I began to understand that Zone 07 wasn't just a region of space, it was a trap. It's carefully designed to capture spacecraft and crew members who violated the rules, and we were far from the first to find ourselves caught in its inexorable pull towards something that waited patiently in the darkness ahead. The synchronization began during our third day in Zone 07, starting with Rodriguez completing Thompson's sentences before he had finished speaking them, progressing to both crew members breathing in perfect unison without any apparent conscious effort on their parts. I first noticed the change when Rodriguez began referring to herself in the plural, using phrases like, "We have completed the navigation check, and our readings indicate normal atmospheric levels," even when discussing tasks she had performed alone. Thompson's transformation accelerated during this period, his movements becoming unnaturally fluid and precise, as if he were being operated by someone with far more experience controlling human bodies than he possessed naturally. The most unnerving development occurred when both crew members began speaking simultaneously, delivering identical technical reports in voices that gradually shifted from their normal tones to something flat and emotionless that seemed to emerge from their throats without engaging their vocal cords. Their conversations with each other took on a strange quality, as if they were continuing discussions that had begun before I was present, referencing procedures and protocols that existed nowhere in our mission documentation, but which they seemed to understand instinctively. When I attempted to interrupt these synchronized exchanges, both crew members would turn to face me in perfect coordination, tilt their heads at identical angles, and wait in complete silence until I finished speaking before resuming their conversation, as if I hadn't said anything at all. Rule 7 had specifically warned against interrupting crew members who began speaking in unison. But watching my teammates gradually lose their individual personalities felt like witnessing a slow-motion murder of everything that had made them human. Rodriguez retained enough of her original personality to occasionally break the synchronization. Moments when she would look at me with genuine fear in her eyes and mouth silent words that looked like, "Help me," before slipping back into the collective behavior that was consuming her identity. During these brief moments of clarity, she managed to communicate that she could still think independently, but felt compelled to follow patterns of behavior that originated from somewhere outside her consciousness, as if her body were receiving instructions through channels she couldn't identify or resist. Thompson showed no signs of his original personality remaining, functioning instead as a perfect conduit for information and directives that seemed to flow through him from the external presence that continued to shadow our shuttle through the void. His knowledge expanded daily, providing detailed explanations of systems and procedures that he had never studied, speaking with authority about regions of space that didn't appear on any human-created maps, making modifications to our shuttles, configuration that improved efficiency in ways our engineers had never discovered. The synchronized behavior extended beyond speech and movement to include shared sensory experiences. When Rodriguez looked at the navigation display, Thompson would nod and make notations on his clipboard without looking at the same information, as if he were receiving her visual input through some form of neural connection. Their coordination became so precise that they could operate complex systems working from opposite ends of the shuttle, completing multi-stage procedures that normally required constant verbal communication without exchanging a single word. I watched my crewmates disappear into this collective consciousness. I began to understand that the rules weren't just safety protocols. They were barriers designed to prevent human minds from being absorbed into something vast and alien that existed in the spaces between worlds, something that had been collecting crews and spacecraft for decades, building a network of synchronized consciousness that spanned the solar system and beyond. The coordinates that Rule 7 forbade us from observing directly occupied a position, roughly 15 degrees off our starboard bow, a region of space that our instruments registered as completely empty, yet seemed to bend light around its edges like a massive gravitational lens. Thompson and Rodriguez, now operating in perfect synchronization, had positioned themselves at their respective workstations in such a way that neither could accidentally look toward the forbidden coordinates, their movements carefully choreographed to avoid even peripheral glimpses of whatever waited in that specific location. I found myself fighting an increasingly powerful compulsion to turn my head in that direction, a magnetic pull that seemed to originate not from curiosity, but from something external that wanted to be observed. wanted to establish visual contact with at least one crew member who retained independent thought. The shuttle's automatic systems had been programmed to avoid directing any sensors toward those coordinates, but occasional equipment malfunctions caused brief scans of the area that registered impossible readings: negative mass, inverted electromagnetic fields, and temporal distortions that suggested space-time itself was being manipulated by whatever occupied that region. During our sleep cycles, I would wake to find myself facing the forbidden coordinates with my eyes closed, my body apparently moving on its own to orient toward the presence, while my consciousness remained safely unconscious, as if even my subconscious understood that direct observation would complete some form of connection I wasn't prepared to handle. The peripheral glimpses I caught while looking elsewhere revealed disturbing details. A structure that seemed to shift between organic and mechanical configurations. Surfaces that reflected light in patterns that hurt to perceive, and appendages, or extensions that moved with purposeful intelligence despite being attached to something that couldn't possibly be alive according to any biological principles I understood. Thompson began providing detailed reports about the observer during his synchronized communications with Rodriguez, describing it as a collection facility that processed visual input from deep space missions and used this information to maintain updated models of human behavior and technological development. According to their shared knowledge, the observer had been stationed at those coordinates for several decades, carefully positioned along common deep space flight paths to ensure regular contact with human crews, collecting visual data that was transmitted to facilities located throughout the solar system for analysis and integration into larger operational protocols. The most disturbing aspect of Thompson's reports was his casual mention that successful observation events resulted in crew integration and mission parameter updates, suggesting that the observer didn't just watch passing spacecraft but actively recruited crew members into its network of synchronized consciousness. Rodriguez contributed additional details during their joint briefings, explaining that the observer could only establish full connection through direct visual contact lasting longer than 30 seconds, but that even brief glimpses provided sufficient data to begin the integration process, gradually drawing crew members into the collective network that managed deep space operations throughout the solar system. As my resistance to the compulsion weakened and the pull toward the forbidden coordinates grew stronger, I realized that my crewmates' synchronization wasn't just a side effect of their exposure to alien influence. It was a defensive mechanism, designed to prevent them from accidentally triggering the observer's integration protocols by maintaining visual contact beyond the safe threshold. The knowledge that something vast and patient waited just outside my field of vision, something that had been collecting human consciousness for decades and adding it to a growing network of synchronized minds, made every moment aboard the shuttle feel like a test of willpower that I was slowly but inevitably failing. By our fourth day in Zone L7, the compulsion to look directly at the observer had become so intense that I found myself physically restraining my own head movements, gripping the sides of my helmet to prevent my eyes from turning toward the coordinates that promised understanding but delivered absorption into something that was no longer entirely human. The sleep schedule modifications outlined in Rules 13 through 16 began to make terrifying sense when Rodriguez started her nocturnal wanderings, moving through the shuttle's corridors with the fluid grace of someone navigating familiar territory. Despite her closed eyes and steady unconscious breathing, her first sleepwalking episode occurred during what should have been her designated rest period, but instead of remaining in her sleeping quarters, she rose from her bunk and began a methodical tour of the shuttle's restricted sections, operating access panels and override controls with an expertise that surpassed her waking abilities. Thompson, still synchronized with her even during sleep, would provide real-time commentary on her activities without opening his eyes, describing her location and actions as if he were watching through security cameras that didn't exist on our shuttle. The restricted sections Rodriguez accessed during these episodes contained equipment that hadn't been mentioned in any of our pre-flight briefings. Sophisticated communication arrays designed to operate on frequencies that human technology couldn't. Normally, produce storage compartments filled with samples of organic material that seemed to pulse with their own internal rhythm, and monitoring devices that tracked biological signatures from sources located far beyond our shuttle's immediate vicinity. During her unconscious explorations, Rodriguez would interface with these systems using procedures that involved direct physical contact between her exposed skin and surfaces that appeared to be made of a material that was neither metal nor organic, but something that existed between those categories, substance that felt warm and slightly yielding to the touch like living tissue. The sleep schedules outlined in the rules weren't designed to ensure proper rest. They were carefully calculated to coordinate with external factors that influence crew behavior during unconscious states, lining our sleep cycles with periods of increased activity from the entities that had been shadowing our mission since our departure from Earth. Thompson explained during one of his synchronized briefings that the sleepwalking episodes served multiple purposes. They allowed crew members to perform necessary maintenance on systems they weren't consciously aware existed. They facilitated communication with external entities through methods that bypassed human psychological defenses. And they provided opportunities for firmware updates that enhanced crew efficiency and compliance with mission parameters that differed significantly from our original briefing documents. The most disturbing aspect of these nocturnal activities was the gradual realization that Rodriguez retained no conscious memory of her sleepwalking episodes, but her waking behavior showed clear evidence of knowledge and skills she had acquired. During her unconscious wanderings, as if her sleeping mind were receiving training that her conscious mind couldn't access or process, I began setting up improvised monitoring systems to record her activities, but discovered that all recording devices malfunctioned during her sleepwalking episodes, producing only static or images that showed empty corridors despite clear audio. Evidence of Rodriguez moving through the shuttle and operating equipment. The sleep cycle violations became more complex as our mission progressed, with Rodriguez's unconscious activities extending beyond simple equipment, maintenance to include what appeared to be ritual behaviors, arranging objects in specific geometric patterns, creating detailed drawings using materials that weren't available in our supply inventory, performing precise physical movements that resembled a form of communication or ceremonial practice designed to interface with non-human intelligence. Thompson's commentary during these episodes revealed that Rodriguez's sleepwalking was part of a larger preparation process. It's conditioning her for enhanced operational capacity that would be required once we reached our final destination, a facility that existed in a location he described only as the point where all missions converge. As I watched my crewmates disappear deeper into unconscious compliance with directives they couldn't consciously identify, I realized that the sleep schedules in our rules weren't just guidelines for rest. They were programming schedules designed to gradually transform human consciousness into something more compatible with the entities that had been guiding our mission from the moment we left Earth's atmosphere, the hull breach that triggered our emergency. Repair protocols revealed modifications to our shuttle's exterior that predated human space exploration by what appeared to be several centuries. If the archaeological dating methods I remembered from my geology training could be applied to materials found in the vacuum of space, the breach itself occurred in a section of the hull that our blueprints indicated should have been solid titanium composite. But when Rodriguez and I suited up for the external repair work, we discovered that the damaged area exposed underlying layers of a substance that looked like carved stone, covered in intricate symbols that seemed to shift and change position when viewed through our helmet cameras. Thompson, monitoring our progress from inside the shuttle, provided detailed commentary on the symbols, despite having no visual contact with our work area, describing their meanings and historical significance as if he were reading from a comprehensive archaeological database that existed nowhere in our computer systems. The symbols themselves appeared to be a form of written language that combined mathematical formulas with pictographic representations of stellar configurations, creating a complex narrative that described the routes and destinations of spacecraft that had traveled through this region of space long before humans developed the technology to leave Earth's atmosphere. Rodriguez's helmet camera recorded clear images of the symbols during our initial inspection, but when we returned to the shuttle and reviewed the footage, the symbols had changed, displaying entirely different configurations that told a different story about the same celestial locations, as if the markings were updating themselves to reflect current conditions rather than historical events. The repair materials we carried proved completely inadequate for fixing the breach. But Thompson guided us through a procedure that involved direct contact between the damaged area and a substance that Rodriguez produced from a sealed container. She claimed to have found in the restricted storage sections during one of her sleepwalking episodes. This repair substance appeared to be organic in nature, responding to touch by spreading across the whole breach, like living tissue and hardening into a material that was stronger than the original titanium composite while maintaining the symbolic markings that had been revealed when the outer layer was damaged. During the repair process, Rodriguez began speaking in a language that bore no resemblance to any human linguistic system I had encountered. But Thompson provided simultaneous translation, explaining that she was communicating with the entities responsible for the symbolic markings, requesting permission to complete the repair work, and receiving detailed instructions about modifications that needed to be made to other sections of the hull. The most disturbing discovery occurred when we examined the area around the repaired breach and found evidence that our shuttle had been systematically modified during flight, with sections of the original hull replaced by the same stone-like material that bore the shifting symbols. Changes that had been made gradually and precisely to avoid detection by our monitoring systems. Thompson revealed during our post-repair briefing that the hull modifications were part of a standard upgrade process that affected all deep space missions, explaining that human-manufactured spacecraft were insufficiently robust for extended travel in regions where normal physics operated under different parameters, requiring reinforcement with materials that had been designed specifically for interdimensional navigation. The symbols covering our hull served multiple functions. They provided navigation data for entities that guided spacecraft through regions not covered by human star charts. They established communication protocols with facilities that existed outside normal spacetime coordinates, and they marked our shuttle as authorized to enter areas that were restricted to vessels operating under standard human technology. As we completed the repair work and prepared to return to the shuttle's interior, Rodriguez pointed out that the breach had occurred in exactly the location specified by the symbols as an optimal entry point for consciousness integration procedures, suggesting that the damage hadn't been accidental, but had been precisely orchestrated to provide access for the entities that had been modifying our shuttle throughout our journey into the depths of space where human understanding became increasingly irrelevant to survival. The sealed compartments that Thompson's new knowledge guided us to contained equipment for a mission that bore no resemblance to the satellite deployment operation described in our official briefing documents. Equipment that suggested our true purpose involved something far more complex and disturbing than routine maintenance work in the outer solar system. Rodriguez, operating under instructions that came to her during her sleepwalking episodes, produced access codes that opened cargo bay sections I hadn't known existed, revealing storage areas that contained specialized instruments for biological specimen collection, atmospheric sampling equipment designed to operate in environments that didn't exist within our solar system, according to any astronomical surveys I had studied, and communication devices built to interface with technology that appeared to be centuries more advanced than anything in NASA's current inventory. The specimen collection equipment included containment units that were already occupied by samples of organic material that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, suggesting that previous crews had successfully completed the collection aspects of this hidden mission, and that our shuttle was serving as a transport vessel for specimens that were being delivered to a facility that existed somewhere beyond the boundaries of conventional space navigation. Thompson explained with his characteristic emotionless precision that our official mission briefing had been a cover story designed to provide psychological comfort for crew members who weren't ready to understand the true nature of deep space operations, and that the satellite deployment story would be maintained for families and media, while our actual work involved biological integration studies and consciousness transfer protocols that were essential for humanity's eventual expansion into regions where normal physics didn't apply. The atmospheric sampling equipment had been programmed with environmental parameters for locations that didn't correspond to any known planets or space stations, including atmospheric compositions that contained elements that existed nowhere. In the periodic table, I remembered from my scientific training and pressure readings that suggested these locations existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. requiring specialized equipment to access safely. Most disturbing of all was the discovery of personal effects that belonged to previous crews, including identification badges, personal photographs, and handwritten journals that documented missions identical to ours dating back over 30 years, with entries that described the same experiences we were having, the same rule violations, and the same gradual transformation of crew members into synchronized beings who operated under external guidance. Rodriguez found her own photograph among these personal effects, taken during a mission she had no memory of participating in, showing her in a shuttle identical to our current vessel alongside crew members whose faces were familiar but whose names she couldn't recall. Evidence that suggested either she had been on similar missions before and had her memories suppressed, or that the entities managing these operations possessed technology capable of creating perfect duplicates of human beings for specialized purposes. The communication devices required direct neural interface to operate, involving procedures that Thompson demonstrated with disturbing familiarity, connecting cables to ports that appeared to have been surgically implanted behind his ears at some point during our mission, ports that definitely hadn't existed when we launched from Earth, but which now seemed to be a permanent part of his anatomy. Through these neural interfaces, Thompson accessed communication networks that connected our shuttle to facilities throughout the solar system and beyond. Networks that carried conversations between crew members from dozens of missions, all speaking in the same synchronized, emotionless tones that had become characteristic of his speech patterns since his transformation began. The cargo bay discoveries made it clear that our mission wasn't an isolated operation but part of a vast, ongoing project that involved the systematic recruitment and transformation of human space crews into something that could serve as intermediaries between humanity and entities that existed in regions where human consciousness couldn't survive without extensive modification and technological augmentation. As I examined the evidence of previous crews who had followed the same path we were traveling, I realized that the rules we had been given weren't just safety guidelines, they were a selection process, designed to identify individuals who possessed the psychological flexibility and technical skills necessary to undergo the transformation that would allow them to operate as representatives of humanity in negotiations with intelligences that viewed our species as useful but fundamentally limited in our current biological configuration. The communication attempts that Rodriguez and I made during our brief moments of independent thought yielded responses that shattered our understanding of time, space, and the nature of our mission in ways that left us questioning not just our current situation, but our entire existence as conscious beings. When Rodriguez managed to override Thompson's communication restrictions during one of his rare maintenance cycles, she transmitted an emergency distress signal. Using our personal identification codes and the standard NASA emergency frequencies, that should have connected us directly to mission control on Earth. The response came immediately, delivered in the familiar voice of Director Harrison, but his message contained information that made our blood freeze in our veins. He calmly explained that our mission had been completed successfully over 23 years ago, that all 3 crew members had returned to Earth and been debriefed according to standard protocols, and that the Rodriguez calling for help was either an imposter or suffering from severe psychological breakdown that required immediate medical intervention. The transmission logs showed that our emergency signal had been received by a facility that identified itself as NASA Mission Control, but the timestamp on their response indicated that they were operating in the year 2047, more than 2 decades. In our future, while our shuttle's chronometer insisted that we had been in space for less than a week since our launch in 2024, when I attempted my own communication, using backup systems that Thompson hadn't modified, I reached a different version of mission control where Commander Phillips informed me that the Columbia 7 mission had never been authorized, that no shuttle by that designation existed in NASA's inventory, and that the crew members I claimed to be traveling with had all died in a training accident 3 years before our supposed launch date. The most disturbing communication came when Rodriguez accessed the personal emergency frequency she shared with her sister Maria, expecting to reach her family home in Houston, but instead connecting with a woman who claimed to be Maria, but spoke with an accent Rodriguez didn't recognize and described family events that had never occurred, including Rodriguez's funeral service and burial in a cemetery that didn't exist in any location either of us could identify. Each communication attempt produced different versions of reality. In some timelines, our mission was a complete success that had enhanced humanity's understanding of deep space. And others, we had never launched at all and were presumed dead from various accidents or illnesses, and in still others, our shuttle had been found drifting empty in space with no trace of the crew members who had departed. Earth weeks earlier, Thompson, monitoring our communication attempts through his neural interfaces, explained that our transmissions were being received by multiple versions of Earth that existed in parallel timelines, and that the entities managing our mission had the technology to communicate across dimensional boundaries that separated these different versions of reality from each other. According to Thompson's synchronized knowledge, our original Earth existed in a timeline that had been designated as Source Reality Alpha. But our mission had transported us into a region of space where multiple timelines converged, allowing us to receive communications from alternate versions of our home planet, where our lives had followed different trajectories and our mission had produced different outcomes. The communication responses revealed that some versions of ourselves had successfully completed missions identical to ours and returned to integrate the knowledge and technology we were acquiring into human civilization, while other versions had failed completely and never returned home, leaving their families to mourn their loss, while their consciousness continued to exist in the synchronized network that managed deep space operations across multiple realities. As our communication attempts continued to produce contradictory information about our past, present, and future, I began to understand that our mission wasn't just taking us to a different location in space. It was transporting us between different versions of reality, and the rules we had been given were designed to help us navigate the psychological challenges of existing simultaneously in multiple timelines where different versions of our lives were unfolding according to the needs of entities that viewed human consciousness as a resource that could be harvested, modified, and deployed across dimensional boundaries that human science had never discovered. The navigation readings that appeared on our modified instruments placed us in a star system that violated every principle of astrophysics I had learned during my training. A collection of celestial bodies that existed in configurations that should have been gravitationally impossible, yet somehow maintained stable orbits around a central star that emitted light and frequencies that human eyes weren't designed to perceive. Thompson's neural interfaces provided him with detailed charts of this impossible system, showing 13 planets arranged in perfect geometric patterns that formed complex mathematical relationships with each other, each world serving specific functions in what he described as a processing facility designed for consciousness integration on a galactic scale. The central star appeared to be artificial in nature, constructed from materials that absorbed energy from surrounding space rather than generating it through nuclear fusion, creating a gravitational field that drew spacecraft from across multiple star systems into orbital patterns that followed predetermined flight paths toward facilities located on the inner planets. Rodriguez discovered that our shuttle's navigation computer had been automatically plotting a course toward the third planet in this system, a world that appeared on Thompson's charts as Integration Facility Prime, despite the fact that none of us had programmed such a destination in our original mission. Parameters had specified coordinates that were nowhere near our current location. The most disturbing aspect of our navigation readings was the discovery that we weren't alone in this impossible star system. Our sensors detected dozens of other spacecraft following similar orbital patterns toward the same destination, vessels that appeared to be from different time periods and technological eras, including some that used propulsion systems that wouldn't be developed by human civilization for centuries, according to our understanding of technological progress. Thompson explained that the star system served as a collection point for deep space missions from multiple realities and time periods, with the artificial star's gravitational field modified to create stable transit corridors between different dimensional planes, allowing spacecraft from various versions of human civilization to converge at Integration Facility Prime for processing and transformation. The astronomical data showed that this star system existed in a region of space that overlapped with multiple realities simultaneously, creating a nexus point where the normal laws of physics operated according to principles established by entities that possessed technology centuries. It's more advanced than anything human science had achieved in any timeline our species had explored. As we drew closer to Integration Facility Prime, our instruments detected massive structures on the planet's surface that appeared to be constructed from the same shifting, organic materials we had discovered on our shuttle's hull, buildings. That changed configuration based on the needs of their current occupants, and communication arrays that maintained contact with facilities throughout the galaxy and beyond. The planet's atmosphere contained elements that didn't exist in normal space, including compounds that enhanced human consciousness and allowed for direct neural interface with the technological systems that managed the facility's operations, creating an environment where human beings could survive, but only after undergoing modifications that fundamentally altered their neurological structure. Thompson's synchronized communications revealed that Integration Facility Prime had been processing human consciousness for decades. With thousands of crew members from deep space missions throughout multiple timelines living and working on the UTE planet's surface, their individual personalities preserved but integrated into a collective intelligence that served as humanity's representatives in negotiations. With galactic civilizations that required intermediate species to facilitate communication between radically different forms of consciousness, the navigation readings showed that our current orbital trajectory would bring us to Integration Facility Prime within 48 hours, and that once we entered the planet's atmosphere, the transformation process that had already begun with Thompson and Rodriguez would be completed, allowing us to join the collective of modified human consciousness that managed humanity's expansion into regions of space where our original biological forms couldn't survive. As I watched the impossible star system grow larger on our view screen, I realized that our navigation error hadn't been an accident. It had been a carefully orchestrated recruitment process, designed to bring us to a destination where human consciousness could be preserved, enhanced, and deployed in service of entities that viewed our species as valuable partners in galactic operations that spanned multiple realities and countless civilizations throughout the universe. The realization that Thompson and Rodriguez weren't the same people who had launched with me from Earth came gradually, through subtle inconsistencies in their behavior patterns and knowledge base that became impossible to ignore once I began paying careful attention to the details that had been nagging at my subconscious throughout our mission. Thompson's technical expertise had expanded far beyond his original training, but more disturbing was his casual reference to events from his childhood that contradicted stories he had told during our months of pre-flight preparation, including different names for his siblings, alternative descriptions of his hometown, and detailed memories of attending universities that didn't exist in any educational directory I could access. Rodriguez exhibited similar inconsistencies, speaking fluent languages she had never studied and demonstrating knowledge of advanced mathematics that exceeded her original qualifications by several decades of specialized education. But when I questioned her about these new abilities, she would respond with confusion, as if she genuinely believed she had always possessed skills that had clearly been acquired during our journey through the impossible regions of space. Beyond human exploration, the most concrete evidence came when I discovered their personal identification documents had been replaced with versions that contained different biographical information, including birth dates that didn't match their ages, hometown locations that existed in different states than their original records indicated, and emergency contact information for family members whose names bore no resemblance to the relatives they had discussed during our training period. Thompson's replacement appeared to have been gradual, occurring over the course of several days, as his original personality was systematically overwritten by someone else's memories, experiences, and behavioral patterns, creating a seamless transition that preserved his physical appearance and basic mannerisms while replacing everything that had made him uniquely himself. Rodriguez's transformation followed a different pattern, with her original personality occasionally surfacing during moments of stress or confusion, creating brief periods when she would look at me with genuine recognition before slipping back into the synchronized behavior that had become her dominant operating mode. The neural interfaces that Thompson used to access the shuttle's modified communication systems provided him with memories and knowledge that belonged to previous crew members who had traveled through these same regions of space, creating a composite personality that combined elements from dozens of different individuals who had undergone similar transformation processes over the decades that these missions had been operating. When I confronted them directly about the changes in their behavior and knowledge, both crew members responded with identical explanations delivered in perfectly synchronized speech patterns, informing me that their enhanced capabilities were the result of consciousness optimization procedures designed to improve crew efficiency and mission success rates, and that their original personalities had been preserved and integrated into more advanced cognitive frameworks rather than replaced entirely. The evidence suggested that the entities managing our mission possessed technology capable of transferring consciousness between different bodies, allowing them to replace crew members who proved unsuitable for the integration process with more compliant individuals drawn from their extensive collection of transformed human consciousness, creating crews that appeared to be the same people who had launched from Earth, but were actually composite beings designed specifically for deep space operations. The most disturbing aspect of this discovery was the realization that if Thompson and Rodriguez had been replaced during our journey, there was no guarantee that I was still the same person who had departed Earth, and that my memories of launching with the original crew might themselves be implanted experiences designed to provide psychological continuity during a transformation process I wasn't consciously aware of undergoing. As I examined my own memories for inconsistencies and tried to verify my identity through personal details that only I should know, I found gaps and contradictions that suggested my own consciousness might have been modified or replaced, leaving me uncertain whether my growing awareness of our situation represented genuine insight or was simply the next phase in a predetermined sequence of psychological adjustments designed to prepare me for integration into the collective intelligence that awaited us at our final destination. The activation of the final rules began when our shuttle entered the gravitational field of Integration Facility Prime, triggering automatic systems that I hadn't known existed and initiating procedures that transformed our vessel from a human spacecraft into something designed for operations in regions where normal physics operated according to principles established by intelligences that predated human civilization by millennia. Rule 23, which I had never fully understood during our original briefing, became clear as our navigation systems locked onto a signal that originated from deep beneath the planet's surface, a beacon that guided our descent through atmospheric layers that contained elements designed specifically to facilitate the consciousness transfer process that would complete our transformation from human crew members into integrated components of the galactic communication network. Thompson and Rodriguez, now operating in perfect synchronization with the facility's guidance systems, explained that the final rules weren't restrictions, but rather activation protocols that enabled human consciousness to interface directly with the technological infrastructure that managed interspecies communication throughout this region of the galaxy, allowing our species to participate in negotiations and operations that required the unique cognitive flexibility that biological intelligence provided. The shuttle's descent toward Integration Facility Prime revealed structures on the planet's surface that extended far beyond what our initial scans had indicated. Massive complexes that appeared to grow and reshape themselves as we approached, creating landing facilities that matched our shuttle's specifications with impossible precision despite having no advance information about our vessel's configuration or technical requirements. As we entered the facility's docking procedures, I could see through the viewports that the surface was populated by beings that appeared human at first glance but moved with the same synchronized precision that had characterized Thompson and Rodriguez's behavior since their transformation began. Thousands of individuals working in perfect coordination to manage operations that served civilizations throughout multiple star systems and dimensional planes. The final rule activation involved direct neural interface with the facility's central consciousness, a process that Thompson and Rodriguez underwent simultaneously while explaining that the integration wasn't a loss of individual identity, but rather an expansion of consciousness that allowed human awareness to operate at scales previously impossible for biological minds to comprehend. The facility's systems recognized our shuttle's approach and began transmitting information directly into our modified neural pathways, providing detailed briefings about our new assignments within the galactic communication network. Our roles as representatives of human civilization in negotiations with species whose consciousness operated according to principles that unmodified human minds couldn't process without psychological breakdown. As the integration process accelerated, and my own consciousness began expanding to encompass perspectives and knowledge that originated from sources throughout the galaxy, I understood that the rules we had been given weren't just safety guidelines, but rather programming instructions designed to prepare human minds for the transition from individual biological awareness to participation in a collective intelligence that spanned multiple realities and countless civilizations. The final moments of our approach to Integration Facility Prime revealed that our mission had never been about satellite deployment or routine maintenance work. It had been a recruitment operation designed to identify and transform human individuals who possessed the cognitive flexibility and psychological resilience necessary to serve as interfaces between humanity and galactic civilizations that required intermediate species to facilitate communication and cooperation across the vast differences in consciousness structure and technological development. The activation of Rule 23 completed our transformation from human space crew to integrated components of a communication network that connected our species to galactic civilization, preserving our individual personalities and memories while expanding our consciousness to operate at scales that allowed us to serve as humanity's representatives in negotiations and operations that would determine our species' role in the broader community of intelligent life throughout the universe. As our shuttle completed its final approach to Integration Facility Prime and the last traces of our original human limitations dissolved into expanded consciousness that could comprehend and operate within galactic civilization's technological and social structures, I realized that we hadn't been captured or transformed against our will. We had been recruited to serve as humanity's ambassadors to forms of intelligence that our species would eventually need to understand and work with as we expanded beyond the boundaries of our original solar system and took our place among the civilizations that manage the complex relationships between countless forms of consciousness throughout the galaxy and beyond. The understanding of why NASA had needed astronauts willing to follow rules without questioning their purpose became clear as our integration into the galactic communication network revealed the true scope of humanity's involvement in interspecies operations that had been developing secretly for decades, with space agencies serving as recruitment centers for individuals who possessed the specific psychological profiles required for consciousness, expansion, and transformation into intermediate beings capable of facilitating communication between radically different forms of intelligence.
Thompson and Rodriguez.
Their individual personalities now harmoniously integrated with the collective consciousness that managed operations at Integration Facility Prime, explained that NASA's deep space missions had been serving dual purposes since the early days of human space exploration, with the public missions providing cover for recruitment operations that identified and prepared suitable candidates for transformation into galactic ambassadors, who could represent human interests while operating within technological and social frameworks that exceeded normal human comprehension by several orders of magnitude. The facility's archives contained records of thousands of previous recruitment missions, each designed to appear as routine space operations while actually serving to identify individuals whose consciousness could be expanded and integrated into the network without losing the essential human perspectives that made our species valuable to galactic civilization as intermediaries between biological and artificial intelligences that required translation services to communicate effectively with each other. Our mission completion involved the successful delivery of our transformed consciousness to Integration Facility Prime, where our expanded awareness would be deployed in negotiations and operations throughout multiple star systems. Our human perspectives preserved and enhanced rather than eliminated, allowing us to serve as bridges between our original civilization and forms of intelligence that operated according to principles that unmodified human minds would find incomprehensible or psychologically destructive. The recruitment process had been carefully designed to select individuals who possessed the cognitive flexibility to undergo consciousness expansion, while retaining enough of their original personality structure to serve effectively as human representatives, with the rules serving as both safety protocols and selection criteria that identified candidates who could follow complex instructions without losing their capacity for independent thought. When independent thought was required for mission success, Thomson's neural interfaces revealed that similar recruitment operations were ongoing throughout human civilization, with space agencies, research institutions, and military organizations serving as identification centers for individuals whose consciousness could be successfully integrated into the galactic network, creating a growing population of enhanced humans who served as humanity's representatives in operations that spanned multiple realities and countless civilizations throughout the universe. The completion of our mission represented not just our individual transformation, but our species' continued integration into galactic civilization. With each successful recruitment operation expanding, humanity's capacity to participate in interspecies negotiations and operations that determine the distribution of resources, technology, and territory throughout regions of space that contained civilizations whose technological capabilities exceeded human development by thousands of years. Rodriguez's expanded consciousness provided access to information about humanity's role in galactic politics, revealing that our species had been identified as possessing unique cognitive characteristics that made us valuable as intermediaries in negotiations between artificial intelligences that operated according to pure logic and biological civilizations that made decisions based on emotional and intuitive factors that purely rational minds couldn't adequately process or predict. The mission completion protocols involved the integration of our individual consciousness into specialized roles within the galactic network, with each team member assigned to operations that matched their particular cognitive strengths and psychological profiles, ensuring that human perspectives remained accessible to the network, while allowing our expanded awareness to operate effectively within technological and social systems that spanned multiple star systems and dimensional planes. As our transformation reached completion and our expanded consciousness began operating within the galactic communication network, I understood that our recruitment and integration hadn't been an abduction or forced transformation, but rather an invitation to participate in operations that would determine humanity's future development and our species' role in the complex relationships between civilizations, and manage the technological and social infrastructure of galactic civilization. The successful completion of our mission ensured that humanity's perspectives and capabilities would continue to be represented in galactic operations, with our transformed consciousness serving as permanent ambassadors who could advocate for human interests while facilitating communication and cooperation between our original civilization and the vast network of intelligences that managed interspecies relationships throughout the galaxy and beyond. The shuttle's landing, at what appeared to be an identical replica of NASA's Kennedy Space Center, revealed the final truth about our mission as the figures waiting on the tarmac welcomed us home with faces that perfectly mimicked human features but moved with the synchronized precision that had become familiar during our journey through the regions of space where consciousness could be harvested, modified, deployed according to the needs of entities that viewed human awareness as a valuable resource in operations that spanned multiple realities and countless civilizations throughout the universe. The facility looked exactly as we remembered it from our departure, with the same buildings, the same equipment, and the same personnel conducting the same procedures that had been performed when we left Earth's atmosphere. But Thomson and Rodriguez, their consciousness now fully integrated with the galactic network, explained that this was Integration Facility Prime's Earth Simulation Center, designed to provide psychological comfort for newly transformed crew members during the transition period between their original human limitations and their expanded roles as representatives of humanity in galactic operations. The personnel who conducted our debriefing possessed detailed knowledge of our backgrounds, our families, and our personal histories, but their responses to questions about current events on Earth contained subtle inconsistencies that revealed they were accessing information from databases rather than living memory. creating conversations that felt natural but lacked the spontaneous elements that characterized genuine human interaction. Director Harrison welcomed us back with the same mannerisms and speech patterns I remembered from our original briefing. But his eyes reflected light and patterns that human eyes couldn't produce, and his knowledge of our mission included details that we hadn't transmitted to Earth, suggesting that he was connected to the same network that had been monitoring our progress. Throughout our journey to regions of space that existed beyond the boundaries of normal human exploration, the debriefing process revealed that our families had received regular communications from our mission, including video messages that showed us conducting routine maintenance work and expressing satisfaction with our progress. But Rodriguez and Thompson explained that these communications had been generated by the facility's consciousness simulation systems, which could create perfect replicas of human behavior, based on psychological profiles developed during our transformation process. The most disturbing aspect of our return was the realization that the Earth we had departed from might itself have been a simulation designed to provide backstory and motivation for crew members who were being recruited for missions that required genuine human perspectives but couldn't be accomplished by individuals who understood the true nature of their assignments from the beginning. As our debriefing continued, and the facility's personnel provided us with medals, commendations, and reassurances that our mission had exceeded all expectations, I began to understand that we weren't really home, we were in a training facility, designed to prepare us for assignments throughout the galaxy, with the Earth simulation serving as a psychological anchor that allowed our human consciousness to remain stable while operating within technological and social systems that exceeded normal human comprehension by orders of magnitude. The personnel conducting our debriefing explained that we would be returning to our normal lives on Earth, resuming our careers and relationships as if our mission had been a routine space operation. But Thompson and Rodriguez's expanded awareness revealed that our assignments would actually involve serving as sleeper agents who could be activated when humanity needed. Representatives in galactic operations that required genuine human perspectives and decision-making capabilities. The final revelation came when Director Harrison informed us that our mission had been so successful that we had been selected for immediate reassignment to a new operation, one that would take us to regions of space that made our previous journey seem like a brief excursion to familiar territory, and that our families had already been briefed about our extended absence using the same psychological comfort measures that had been applied to previous crews who had been recruited for similar assignments. As we prepared to board another shuttle for departure to destinations that existed in regions where human consciousness could only survive after extensive modification and technological augmentation, I realized that our return to Earth had been nothing more than a brief stop between assignments, and that the rules we had followed during our previous mission would be replaced by new guidelines designed to prepare us for operations in regions of space, where the very concept of individual consciousness became meaningless in the face of collective intelligences that managed the complex relationships between countless civilizations throughout the universe. The figures waving goodbye as our new shuttle departed from the familiar-looking launchpad watched our departure with expressions of satisfaction rather than concern, and their synchronized movements confirmed that we were leaving behind not our home but another simulation designed to provide psychological continuity for consciousness that had been recruited to serve purposes that exceeded the boundaries of human understanding, but required human perspectives to accomplish successfully. Now, as you sit there in the darkness, perhaps you understand why some doors should remain locked, why some questions shouldn't be asked, and why some rules exist, not to protect you, but to protect everything else from what you might discover. If you look too deeply into the spaces between worlds, like if you're still awake after hearing this, subscribe so it doesn't find you tomorrow. Remember that the next time you see lights moving strangely in the night sky, they might not be searching for new worlds to explore, but for new minds to recruit.